And here's what we got going on. I want to show you two different ways using stuff that we've talked about. And the first thing is going back to the maze and getting a texture properly aligned. There's two ways we talked about that. One was in the maze project itself, and the second was an optional activity on Monday to make sure that your texture doesn't shift around in world space if you throw that same projection mapping of the material onto a different sized object. So you can dynamically size and scale objects, and that material looks the same on it. We've talked about prototyping using brushes. We did that in the corridor. And we've talked a little bit about using a quick build process using a static mesh with the maze. So both of those ideas could be used if you're given a design to come up with that generation one. So in a pre-recording I did, I talk about building a blueprint. So let me show you what that blueprint looks like. Now, if you understand where we're going by looking at the calendar, please remember you're going to design a level. You're going to build a level. You're going to update your design so it makes more sense. And then your design will be available for somebody else to build. And that's going on cross sessions. So if you have a good design, an interesting, attractive design, it's more likely more people are going to want to build it, which goes into your portfolio as more examples of your design being built. If your design's either too complex or too simple, well, probably too simple, you'll probably still get built because, let's face it, some people are only in the class because they're keeping busy and they don't want to be doing other things. Those of you who are passionate, be careful about throwing too much into the design because you'll be the only one that takes on that particular project because it's so special to you. So when you're designing your level for others to consider building, scale it appropriately for what you would think is a typical student in the project rather than your most ambitious abilities, where each of the individual squares is 500 grids. If I look at his level, which I'm going to show you in a minute, if I look from a top-down view and I check it, it's the right size and the material map is a good projection. That's a great starting point as long as you are consistent. Now, he's using a 1-to-1. One grid is 500. Once you start to play with that scale, you might decide, and this is where the value is in designing, building a prototype and play testing it, it might actually make more sense to use each grid is 250 rather than 500, meaning every two lines is 500. So I might play with that on this floor that I build in a second here, is using the equivalence that each grid is only 250, just to show you how it plays out comparing 500 to 200. And so once I do option 1 and option 2, we're going to compare scales. Right. Option 1 was, and these both begin with scaling for material. Let's take a look at the material that got built here. In the content folder, I'm going to come down in the content folder. It's the content browser. If you don't see your folders, make sure you open that up. This is the student's first name, last name, and there's a folder they built called textures. And they've got the first level of, 1F is the layout for the first floor, etc., etc. The material instances that he's got, here's one of them right here. He's got this combination. Remember, you build your material, and then you build your material instance. The scaling on here is tremendous. And that's one of the things that people are facing, is that it's hard to believe that you want to scale this thing up this big to get it to map to where it's authentically there. Probably be a good idea if I shared this with you so you could grab this at a 500 scale. I'll give you a screenshot of this later. I'll put it on our game programming drive for you. Now, the material instance is based on a material. So that's based on this material. The material itself is using a couple of things we've talked about. We've got the textures that normally go into a texture coordinate for the maze, but he's implemented the things from Monday where he's converted them to texture objects, and he's using this vector 3D parameter, and he's using those to set the scale. All right. I don't want to throw in any extra complexities, but he's got the material and he's got the material instance. The net result, if we look at his level, and I look at a top-down view, inlet, so unlit's fine. We'll go to top view, and I get in here and I check the scale. I press down on the middle mouse button and I click and drag I've got 12,000 units for the 24 squares, which means each square is 500 units. And this is the level that's been built. Now, there's a couple of things I did in this level that he didn't have. I threw a couple lights in, and I built what's called a light mass importance value, just for full disclosure. So once that's done, do you remember how we used a wall as a blueprint to build our maze? It was 500 by 500. Well, remember, we've learned a little bit about blueprints. So um, one thing I didn't have time to walk Chris through, but I did in a later session, is we built this little blueprint. Let's take a look at it. We'll take a look at the viewport so you see what it's made up of. And we built a blueprint that when we're looking at it, I'll show you. It's actually got 3 different walls in it. Now this is the scene root right here. And rather than throw the wall right on it, which is the default in the standard static mesh and the starter content, if you look in the upper left-hand corner here, you're going to see there's actually 3 different walls, and their offset, their world location, well, not world location, their offset from the scene root makes it such that they're all around with this in the center. You could put a 4th wall in there and basically build a Minecraft cube with 4 different textures on it. But what we've done here is we've put a different texture on each side. So depending on which way we position this building block, we can easily have one of 3 different walls. We can rotate the cube so that an outside is there. And if you wanted to have a little, I don't know, closet area that was accessible, the only problem would be on the inside is you'd have 3 different materials viewable from the inside. So once we've got this blueprint that's 500 by 500 with 3 walls, and we've got the grid snapped down, it's almost as quick as what we were doing. So you want to grab the one with the cube, as what we were doing with the maze. I do want to save those changes. So where he left this off did not really have a finished construction. What he started doing, and it's not uncommon, and I'm not picking on anybody, but they used the same exact process as the maze. They didn't add the extra pieces of knowledge that we've spiraled into the curriculum. And as you learn something new, you might not necessarily see the application. So I'm trying to really demonstrate to you. So for completeness, I'll show you what Chris started doing with his building. So I have to go to unlit. So I'm going to make it full screen F11. I'm sure in the right screen, aren't I? Yes. And there's a light right there. I'm going to go into unlit mode. See, without the light, it gets pretty dark in there, so I started adding some work lights. I've swapped out the texture on the bottom of his, just to make it more interesting, and we've still got our layout here. Funny how my camera is right where the pointer is, where I'm shooting my targets. Interesting. That's a standard wall in front of us. Right here, this is a standard 500 by 500 wall. If I rotate this around, snap the way it is, you'll see there's not much to it. Change my snap here so it's less. Let's go to, I don't know, 10, and I'll change my snap to 30 just to kind of rotate one of these around and show you that this is only a 500 by 500. So he had been building his with these. Now the problem you end up with is you've got thin walls that you're trying to line up, and you end up with a creation that looks a lot like this, because you're trying to use a wall that's thin to fill a block. So what I wanted to walk you up to doing is, when you go to build this level, is if you use a blueprint with multiple walls. And that's what I've done here in, let me restart this level just by doing Alt-P and go back to the beginning. This is using a blueprint cube. And the things that are different is I took that blueprint I showed you, and I started building, see, I can do an escape from here and just kind of float up. So each one of these blocks here, and you can kind of think Minecraft, has got multiple sides on it. Let me go into move mode and pick one up so you can kind of see how it's put together, and I'll rotate it around. Scroll back a little bit. So this is one of those blueprint cubes. So if I want to change the look of one of these corridors, I can just rotate this so that I can have a brick version of it, or I could have a steelish version, or I could have this tech hexagon level. So let me put that back where it was. Consistency. As I fly through the level here, not in play mode, but just to kind of show you, each of these is a blueprint. So this whole wall here gets laid out just like we did with the maze. However, we've got a grid of 500 by 500 using basically cubes. This is maybe off a little bit, but it works. There's a starting point. Over here would be, and by the way, some people were wondering, why is there an F on each of the levels? This is actually so that when you stack the pages, you can keep track of where this is. It's kind of like north, south, east, west, but we just used the letter F for finish when the paper was put together. So he's got the lower level built primarily with static meshes. We'll be able to see through the floor here. And I've already taken the liberty of changing his static meshes to a different material. This is a cool trick. So if you've got yours built with the standard material, a quick way to change the look on this, because I'm assuming you got your geometry done, and if you don't, you can consider switching to this mode. It's a little bit of setup, but it makes for a really quick build. So I want you to understand that. All right, let me get out a full screen on this particular level. And if you have a static mesh wall over here, you can select all of them that match the same type with just a couple of clicks and then change the textures on them. You'll see right here, I've got a texture that's using this hexagon pattern from the starter content. So if I go to starter content and I look at my materials and I decide that I want to use a different material, it's really irksome to go in and click on every static mesh and then say, okay, let's make them look like this. I'm just going to grab this. Sorry, I should move myself down there. I selected a different material and then used the assign button. Well, that's fine for that one wall, but what if I want to do all of them? It's not purely Chris's. If you have your level available and you want to see how to change the texture all at once, and it's not been made from a blueprint, there's a right-click option to select all of the matching static meshes of that type. Then you'll notice in the material, it'll say either 1 or 2. If you've been playing around with a texture on one, it'll show both. You can actually use the assignment to the second one. It collapses to show you all of the static meshes have got the same material on them. So that was method 1. That was using, both of these are based on using a grid, and it's setting up a blueprint of a static mesh so that you can actually build your whole level based on cubes. Very Minecraft-like. The other way to do it, and it still requires that you have the, I don't think I made any changes, but just so it doesn't ask me later, did I change any instructions? I don't think so. So now I'm going to go back into the content folder, which has been named after Chris, and I'm going to go in and just do a quick demonstration on building with BSPs, which is what you did when you built the corridor. BSPs can be fun because you can push them around and do cool things with it. I think at least one student was playing around with this. And let me jump into the level here. I'm on the upper level I'm going to play around with now. And get to a better angle where you can kind of see what I'm doing. All right. It's the same grid up one level, and each of these is 500 across in this world. So some people might be on this recently placed area, shift 1 for the placement, and they might grab a cube, which is a static mesh, and they might drag it into the world, and they might say, all right, I'm going to size this so it's 500. And so a couple ways to do that, as you know, we can come in here, but we're scaling this. So even when we do a uniform scale, we end up with this thing that's, let's say, 500 by 500. This is a static mesh. I guess I missed the one change there. You line it up and you got to, if you tried building it with a static mesh, it gets really awkward. So again, for quick prototyping, I'm going to delete that cube, and that's what that was to remind me to show you. I'd like you to use, if you're going to use brushes, it's a different mode here. It's geometry mode. We did this when we worked with the corridor. Drag one of these out, and the additional thing is you don't want to just scale it, but you can explicitly say, all right, this is going to be 500 units by 500 units by 500 units, and that's going to be exactly one box. Now, if you look at your layout and everything is using 2 grid spaces, you could decide you want to make this 1,000. So I could actually just make one of these 1,000. And then if I start to play with it, I can continue to edit by changing the properties on the brushes, or I can get into geometry mode. I don't know if you remember geometry mode, but just to remind you that when we're on the geometry in the upper left-hand corner, when we're on a box, we're going to switch our mode into geometry mode. So just above here, I'm going to click on the word mode, and I'm going to go into brush editing. Sorry, geometry was what I'm used to calling it. And if I just start to pull this out and I keep track of my pattern here, I can line this up with the spot here. Then I want to extrude to add an extra level I can bring out the other way. So when I click on extrude, there's a reminder that I need to switch this icon above my head here so that it goes from world to local coordinate system. I'm just going to pull it out 500 units. I could do myself a big favor here by making sure my snap's at 500. That way when I pull things out, it'll snap to 500 every time. And this would be another way to do it, not using static meshes. And as I'm doing this, you might want to think, well, yeah, the other way is it gives you the texture. You can add a texture to your brush as well. And so just remember on that last snap that you go to do this, make sure you set yourself in extrude mode and make sure you're pulling it out at 500 units and then switch faces and then just keep pulling out. And you can quickly prototype using either method. I think brushes are a little faster myself, but all right, this one would need to be split, so I'm going to undo my last change there. Make sure I got my snap set to 500. I should be able to get 1, 2, 3. All right, so yeah, this in fact is going to be 1,000. So if I can hold down Control and click on both of them to move both out at a time. And you will build speed by playing with this. Once you've got your scale set, you can do it with brushes or you can do it with static meshes. Either way works. I'm going to right click and do play from here. Show you that the snap's a little bit off, but that can be fixed. There's the geometry using brushes. I hit escape and do a play here. The player start by default is in a mode where we're using, which just went to unlit, using a blueprint cube. Both are valid methods. Both should allow you to quickly prototype using, if someone gives you a grid and you can figure out what the grid size is, you should be able to quickly prototype the geometry. I hope that was helpful and useful. I'd like to save this so that other people can jump into the Schoology conference, and I'll push it up to YouTube a little bit later today after some edits. I'm going to bounce this session, and I want to give you a heads up. I've got a 9 o'clock meeting with an opportunity for potential job shadows internships. So I want to jump on that. I need to get ready for it. So we're going to save this. I'm going to reopen a new level. But it's going to be more or less asynchronous, working on an admiration day for the second hour of class, or at least hour and a half. But you can use the lab as long as you want. Focus on showing your construction. A couple of quick tips before I wrap this up. Let's say that this student wanted to show this level off. I could build the lighting. I would get rid of those messages. But remember, you can use your different render modes in the midst of a screen recording. So I might move myself around a little bit, and then I might decide I want to show this in unlit mode so that they can really see what's going on. And I might even want to, as I move about the level, and this ends up being a huge level when each box is 500 units. I might get to an angle where the geometry might be interesting to show them what we're dealing with here. Now you can see the difference between the BSP brushes and the static meshes.